Good Sunday morning, like you follow a Christian church. It's good to have you with me today. I just can't believe how fast summer is flying by. This is the last Sunday in July, and pretty soon we're going to be looking at fall and going back to school. So let's get into the lesson. First, I want to tell you a couple of things that I think are really awesome. One is the youth had a really good week, the LECC youth. They went to Christ 40 Acres down in Honobbe, Oklahoma, and there were 24 participants that went from LECC, and I think they had a really good time. They got to swim in the river, they got to hear some good lessons, and Jeremy actually brought the lesson to the assembly, the whole assembly, on Wednesday evening, and so I know that it was an awesome lesson, and that hopefully it made some people think about what they need to be doing in their Christianity. So, but the big announcement for the week for this family anyway is that on Friday the Banfields came and of course stayed at their lake house here in Eufaula, and they're still members of Lake Eufaula Christian Church. And so Brian, their youngest, had asked to be baptized into Christ, and so that happened on Friday evening. And it was, you know, guys, there's just not anything much better than just knowing that your children are following what God tells us to do. And so that's awesome news. So Bryn is a new Christian, and so we expect to be hearing a lot more from Bryn now that she's not only my granddaughter, she's a sister in Christ now. What a wonderful thing. The lesson this morning is again from Matthew 21. Matthew 21 is a very meaningful chapter because it's one in which sometimes things happen in Matthew 21 that make us kind of uncomfortable, and but you know, nothing in the Bible goes without representing something and helping us understand the sign of the times or what's going on in Jerusalem at the time. And of course, this is the last week that Jesus is going to be walking the earth, and so as a man, and so the Jewish nation has absolutely just missed the fact that they have been dealing with the Messiah, the Son of God. And so chapter 21 is sad in a way because, you know, there's a couple of things that happen in it before Jesus gets into his parables, which also are incredibly meaningful, but a couple of things happen in it that we just think are out of character for Jesus. Like last week, the first thing that he did was go in and just cleanse the temple. I mean, he just cleaned it out, and that was because the money changers and those who were selling animals were cheating people. They had turned the area for the Gentiles in the temple into a den of thieves, is what Jesus called it, his own quote. And so now let's talk about this week, what's going to happen. This week we're going to see something that seems really odd, and this is where Jesus curses the fig tree. And it's going to be from Matthew 18 and 22, but I'm also Matthew 21, 18 through 22 are the verses. And I'm also going to be looking at Mark 11, and that would be verses 12 through 14, and I'm also going to look at Luke 13, 6 through 9 as time allows, because somebody overslept this morning. Does anybody want to guess who it was? Seemed like a great morning to sleep. I'm really glad I got up. Okay. Now, the thing I want you to understand before we go any further into the lesson is that when we're talking about Jesus cursing a fig tree, now what does that mean? Can you picture Jesus standing out there using a whole string of profanities against a fig tree? No, that is not what we're talking about. If you look at the word cursed, and it's used as a verb, an action verb, he's doing something, he's cursing it as a verb. This word means to pray against or to wish evil against a thing. And that is according to the Hebrew language and the Greek language. And so, as we read the story about Jesus cursing the fig tree, we need to be really clear that what he's doing is talking or praying against it and wishing evil on it, which seems really out of character for Jesus, but yet he's going to make a huge point. Now, I want to tell you one other thing before I go any further, and that is that Bible scholars absolutely are all over the place on what is the meaning of this fig tree, because we find it. You know, we start talking about fig trees back in the Old Testament because, you know, they're an example of the nation of Israel. And so, you know, it's got a lot of ways you can go with it. We're going to talk about some of them. We're probably going to run out of time. But come to class this morning and we'll talk about all of them. Okay. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is read for you from Matthew 21, verses 18 through 22. And it says, in the morning, as Jesus was returning to Jerusalem, now you know he's been staying in Bethany, and we just have to assume that he's staying at the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, because those are his dear friends in Bethany, and he has brought Lazarus back to life. So you know that Jesus and his disciples are going to be welcome there anytime they want to stay. So in fact, if they did stay with Mary and Martha that night before, then they must have gotten up really early and left early before Martha had a chance to get up and fix breakfast, because Jesus is hungry. It says, in the morning, as Jesus was returning to Jerusalem, he was hungry, and he noticed a fig tree by the side of the road. He went over to see if there were any figs, but there were only leaves. Then he said to the fig tree, may you never bear fruit again. Now that was the cursing, guys. That was just saying, he's saying something that is negative, and he's just wishing evil on it. May you never bear fruit again. And immediately the fig tree withers up. Now this is Matthew's version, and I want to be sure that you understand that in Matthew's version, he says the word immediately the fig tree withered up. Okay, and then in verse 20, the disciples were amazed when they saw this, and they asked, how did the fig tree wither so quickly? In verse 21, Jesus told them, I tell you the truth, if you have faith and you don't doubt, you can do things like this and much more. You can even say to this mountain, may you be lifted up and thrown into the sea, and it will happen. Now guys, you know, he's not saying that when we have great faith, we're going to pick up a mountain and move it over. He's saying when you have faith and you really believe that you can do all kinds of things. And you know, it has to be God's will though. So when I say I'm going to pray really hard and I have great faith that I'm going to win the lottery, okay, that's not what we're talking about here. Because what we're talking about is, if there's something I'm supposed to be doing as a good steward for Jesus Christ and I really want to do it, then if I really have faith and I pray about it, then he's going to help me and give me the strength to do that. So that's more of in line with what we're talking about. Okay, and he says you can pray in verse 22 for anything, guys. And if you have faith, you will receive it. Now, the end of that subject is, if it's God's will. Always remember that in your prayers, so that you're not saying, well, he said I can pray for $1 million and I didn't get it. If it's God's will. And that's first and foremost in anything that we ask for. Okay, now, that was Matthew's version. Because you know, these 4 Gospels, they all tell the happenings of the last week of Jesus, but sometimes they have a little bit different touch to them. Like in Mark, this is going to be in Mark 11, 12 through 14, Jesus is going to curse the fig tree. But Mark's going to tell you something different about this story than Matthew did. Mark's going to tell you it was too early in the season for there even to be any figs on the tree. I mean, is that odd? That's like saying, okay, I'm mad at my crabapple tree out here because it doesn't have crab apples on it yet and I'm ready to make jam. I mean, they're on there, they're just not ripe. Well, in this case, it was too early to have figs, but Jesus was mad at the tree and he cursed it because there were no figs on it. So doesn't that tell you that he had another message? Now the message may have been what we read over in Matthew, and that is to stop and give his disciples a lesson on faith. Now that's one way to look at it. But in Mark 11, this is a little bit different take. Jesus goes to eat from a fig tree. However, the fig tree has bore no fruit, and he curses it. Then, after he cleans out the temple. Do you see something different between Mark and Matthew? Matthew says he cleaned out the temple, and then the next morning he cursed the fig tree. In Mark, it says that he cursed the fig tree, and then he went and cleared out the temple. Guys, just remember, these are men, these are his disciples, and I think it doesn't matter to me which order they put it in. I know it happened, and I know that whatever is in Scripture is inspired. So it doesn't worry me at all that the order is different because the happenings are there, and that's the important thing. And so, you know, when Peter, it says in Mark that Peter sees that the cursed fig tree is now withered. But, you know, again, wondering, why did he curse the fig tree? If we go to the Life Application Study Bible and see what it says, it's talking about the cursing of the fig tree was an acted out parable that related to the cleansing of the temple. Oh, now, you know, the plot thickens. Let's go on to the parable. Let's talk about the parable a minute. This is called the parable of the barren fig tree, and this is in Luke 13, 6 through 9. Then Jesus told this story. A man planted a fig tree in his garden and came again and again to see if there was any fruit on it. But he was always disappointed. Finally, he said to his gardener, I've waited 3 years, and there hasn't been a single fig. Cut it down. It's just taking up space in the garden. And the gardener answered, Sir, give it one more chance. Leave it another year. I'll give it special attention and plenty of fertilizer. If we get figs next year, fine. If not, then you can cut it down. Here's the notes that come from Life Application Study Bible about that parable in Luke. Jesus pointed out that what would happen to the other kind of tree, the kind that took up valuable time and space, but still produced nothing for the patient gardener. Ooh, are you getting that? Now, by this illustration, Jesus is warning his listeners that God would not tolerate forever their lack of productivity. Sometimes we enjoy God's special treatment. We enjoy God's blessings, but we fail to give anything back in return. Make that correlation now between that fig tree taking up space in the garden, but doing nothing. God has created us to bear fruit, and he expects us to respond to the gardener's patient care. Who's the gardener? Jesus. Luke 3 and 9 records John the Baptist's version. Now, John the Baptist was a fiery preacher, and he says in Luke 3 and 9, this is his version of the same message. Even now, the axe of God's A-X, of God's judgment is poised, ready to sever the roots of the trees. Ooh. Yes, every tree that does not produce good fruit will be chopped down and thrown into the fire. Ooh, John the Baptist is pretty clear on that one. So let me skip, because I'm basically out of time, to one other Bible scholars. He had 2 points about this story that I think that are probably sum it up. And it's, first of all, he's talking about that the story is meant to teach 2 things to the Jewish nation. One, uselessness invites disaster. That is the law of life. Anything that is useless is on its way to be eliminated. And then the second thing is that the profession of faith without practice is condemned. The tree had leaves. The tree was a pretty tree, don't you know? It had leaves on it. This is in April, at the time of the Passover. The leaves were a claim that it had figs. Because, you know, if you come to class, we're going to talk about when the figs start showing up, and when there's a second fruit that's on there, Berea, that starts showing up, and that's in the spring, but the figs aren't ready until late summer, the actual figs on the tree. But this tree had no figs, so its claim was false. Therefore, the tree was doomed. The Jewish nation, here it is, the Jewish nation professed faith in God, but in practice, they were unable to recognize God's own Son. So their worship was empty. It was useless. Therefore, they stood condemned. You know, this is a good lesson for us, that we need to, you know, God has gifted every one of us with fruits. We need to be using them in His kingdom here on earth, so that we'll be rewarded and not cast into the fire when we stand before Christ on judgment. I love you guys. I hope I see you at church today. I hope you enjoyed our little quickie lesson, Matthew 21, on Jesus cursing the fig tree. I'll talk to you later. Thank you.